The ground trembled beneath the ancient forest as the sun pierced through thick layers of mist. Towering above the trees moved a creature of grace and strength, a Mammonchosaurus, her neck stretching high into the sky like a living tower. She was not just a wanderer, but a guardian of secrets buried deep in time. Far from the reach of predators and untouched by human eyes, her world was changing. A storm was coming, not of wind or rain, but of survival. In a land ruled by giants, one gentle titan would walk a path that would shape history forever. In the heart of the late Jurassic period, 160 million years ago, the Earth pulsed with untamed life. The land that would one day be called Asia stretched wide under a golden sun. Dense forests spread across valleys, while massive ferns curled along rivers that carved through hills like slow-moving serpents. Volcanoes rumbled in the distance. Herds of herbivores grazed where the trees gave way to open plains. Among these peaceful giants was a creature unlike any other, long-necked, slow-footed, and noble in her silence. Her name was not known to the world then, but her kind would later be called Mammonchosaurus. She stood over 70 feet long from head to tail. Her neck, longer than a school bus in the future to come, moved with quiet precision as she plucked leaves from the highest branches. Her legs were thick like pillars, supporting the weight of her massive body with each step she took through the undergrowth. Her eyes were soft and searching, filled with a wisdom untouched by time. She belonged to a small herd that traveled in cycles between forest and river, following the rhythm of the earth. Unlike the fierce predators that lurked in shadows or the stampeding herds that thundered across open plains, Mammonchosaurus moved with patience. She listened to the wind. She felt the tremble of the ground. She read the sky as if it spoke to her. They had no words, no tools, no fire. Yet, in her stillness, she held a memory of a world deeper and older than human understanding. In her bones were echoes of continents shifting, of forests rising and falling, of oceans creeping over mountains. Mammonchosaurus did not seek conflict. She did not chase nor flee without cause. But even the calmest of creatures must one day face storms. And in a world where survival often belonged to the fiercest claws or the sharpest teeth, she would have discovered a different kind of strength, one born not from battle, but from endurance and grace. Seasons shifted across the land. Rain softened the ground and rivers swelled before shrinking back in the dry months. The herd moved as they always had, guided by memory and instinct. Mammonchosaurus, who we will call Mara for the sake of her story, was still young by her species' measure. Her body had not yet reached its full length, but her eyes had seen enough change to know that something in the land had begun to feel different. Food was growing scarce in places that once overflowed with leaves. Trees were falling more often. Some had withered without warning. Water holes dried too quickly. Even the insects had vanished in patches of forest where life once buzzed in endless song. One evening, as twilight brushed the sky, Mara raised her head toward the horizon. Smoke, a thin line curled upward from beyond the cliffs where the herd had never gone. The elder of the group, a scarred bull with a cracked tail, rumbled low in his throat. The signal was clear, stay away. But curiosity lingered in Mara's thoughts like the wind pressing through the branches. Predators had grown bold in recent weeks. A pair of allosaurs had trailed the herd from a distance, their yellow eyes gleaming from shadows. They never attacked outright. Not yet, but the scent of danger was always near. The youngest of the herd had to be kept in the center now. The old ones, slower and tired, stayed at the back. Mara found herself drifting between both edges, torn between loyalty and the pull of something she could not name. One morning, a tremor struck the land. Not a mighty quake, but enough to startle birds into flight and silence the forest for several minutes. When the herd reached the river bend that had always been safe, they found the waterline had dropped by half. Cracks ran across the bank. Fish lay trapped in shrinking pools. It was here that the herd faced its first loss. An elder, too weak to move with the group, collapsed near the edge of the water. Mara lingered beside her, brushing her long neck gently against the fallen one. There were no tears in their kind, only silence. The herd moved on. Mara followed, but something deep inside her had shifted. That night, the stars above glowed with fierce clarity. Mara looked toward the distant cliffs again. That same line of smoke still lingered in the dark, but now it was joined by faint flashes of red light. Fire. It was the first time she had ever seen it. By the next week, the herd began its migration early. Their path would take them farther north than usual, into lands none of them remembered. Thick fog rolled in with the morning sun, as if trying to cover the land's secrets. Strange calls echoed through the trees, distant, guttural, and unlike any known predator. Then came the second loss. One of the juveniles strayed too far during feeding. A shadow broke through the trees. It struck fast. The allosaur. The herd stampeded, the ground shaking under their weight. Mara froze for a moment, watching as the predator's teeth found flesh. The cries of the young one rang through the forest, then silence followed. The herd had survived, but something was breaking. Order was shifting. Mara's dreams began to change. She saw trees burning, water rushing backward, shadows swallowing stars. She didn't know if it was memory or warning, but the feeling remained when she woke. And then, just as the land seemed at its weakest, Mara heard a sound unlike any before. It was not a predator. It was not thunder. It was not wind. It was music, soft, low, rising from deep within the cliffs. Drawn by that impossible song, Mara would take a path none of her kind had ever walked, and she would not walk alone. The cliffs rose like giants from the earth, jagged and silent under a pale morning sky. Mara stood at their base, the herd now miles behind. She had left in the night, pulled by the haunting sound that had returned again and again, a low hum, not from any throat or wind, but something deeper, older, buried in the stone. Her journey alone had already tested her. The forest had thinned. The ground was rough and dry. Predators circled but never struck, as if something about her path unnerved them. The air grew hotter the closer she moved toward the cliffs. Trees were sparser now, blackened as if scorched long ago. The smell of ash clung to the wind. She reached a narrow canyon that cut between two peaks. The hum grew louder. It was no song of joy. It was warning, ancient and constant. Beneath her feet, the ground began to tremble, not like the soft tremors of distant footsteps or the shifting of plates far below. This was violent. The land roared. A deep crack split open across the canyon floor. Dust and fire surged from the earth. Volcanic fire. Mara reeled back as steam and heat surged upward. From the cliffs ahead, smoke exploded into the sky. Lava followed, spilling down in glowing rivers. The forest behind her, once green and full of life, was now painted in shades of fire and shadow. The volcano had awakened. The same strange rhythm that had drawn her forward was now erupting in fury. She understood too late. What she had heard was the voice of the earth preparing to tear itself open. From the ridge behind her, the herd appeared. They had followed her trail. Whether by instinct or desperation, they had come. Panic rippled through them as the fires spread. Trees collapsed. The sky turned red. Ash rained down in heavy flakes. Small creatures screamed as they ran. Birds scattered in wild flocks. One path remained. Through the canyon Mara had entered, but it was not wide enough for all of them. Not at once. Not with fire already climbing both sides. And beneath them, the land continued to split. The elders began to turn, calling the herd back, but the way was blocked by falling debris. A landslide crushed the rear of the group. Cries echoed off the stone walls. Mara moved forward, her body pushed against the rocks, neck stretched above the smoke. She stood in the middle of the canyon and let out a deep, thunderous call. It was not fear. It was not pain. It was a command. The herd stopped. Mara turned sideways, using her body to create a shield. The younger one slipped past her flank, hurrying to the narrow gap she had found earlier. A wall of fire followed behind them. Then came the allosaur, the same one that haunted the herd and now stood above the canyon. Cornered like them, desperate, eyes wild from smoke and hunger. It leapt down toward the smallest of the herd, just as it tried pass. Mara struck. Her tail, like a whip made of stone in fury, cracked through the air. It struck the allosaur mid-leap, hurling it against the canyon wall. Bones shattered. The predator slid down, motionless. But the force of her strike had cost her. The ground beneath her gave way. One of her rear legs slipped through the widening crack. She roared, struggling to lift herself, but the earth was no longer firm. The fire was at her side now. The smoke stung her eyes. The heat blistered her skin. The last of the herd had passed. Safe beyond the canyon, Mara stood still, surrounded by fire, refusing to fall. Then came the final quake. The canyon collapsed behind her. When the tremor passed and the earth stilled, silence returned. Not the peaceful silence of wind through trees, but the hollow kind that follows disaster. The canyon where Mara had made her stand was buried beneath stone and fire. Thick clouds of ash hung in the air, turning day into dusk. The herd gathered on the far side of cliffs. Their bodies were dust-covered, their breathing heavy. Many were injured, but alive. The young ones clung close to the elders. They stared back at the smoldering ruin that had once been a path. There was no sign of Mara, no sound, no movement. For a time they waited. A long, aching stillness stretched across the land. The elder bull lifted his head and called once into the smoke. The sound faded unanswered. Then slowly, the herd began to move forward. They had no choice. The forest behind them was gone. The path ahead was unknown. The land had changed, and so had they. One life had been given for the many. Mara's body lay buried beneath layers of stone, hidden where no claw or wind could reach. Her sacrifice was not marked by words or symbols. Her kind left no monuments. But what she had done remained in the blood and memory of those who survived. The youngest of the herd had seen her stand. They would remember. As the days passed, green returned. New rivers cut through fresh soil. Trees sprouted from the ash. Life never ended. It only changed shape. Far beneath the earth, Mara's bones would rest undisturbed. And with time, they would turn to stone. Millions of years later, hands would uncover her remains. Tools would brush away layers of dirt. Her name, once unspoken, would be given by those who studied the past. They would call her Mammonchosaurus. But her story was older than language, older than memory. It was written in silence, in movement, in a single moment when one creature chose to stand so others could walk forward. Time passed not in years but in ages. Mountains rose where rivers once flowed. Oceans swallowed plains and vanished again. Forests that burned were reborn. The land shifted inch by inch until nothing remained the canyon or the trail that Mara had walked. Even the volcano slept once more under layers of stone and silence. But the herd survived, guided by instinct and memory. They found new grazing grounds far from the scorched lands. The young ones grew, taller and stronger with each season. They crossed rivers, climbed hills, and watched stars spin through open skies. They knew no words, yet something of Mara lived on in them. In the way they moved, in the way they protected one another, in how they stayed together even when fear struck from shadows. Generations passed. New herds formed, scattered across lands that would one day carry cities and machines. Bones sank into the earth. Ash became soil. The story was buried deeper and deeper until it rested far beyond the reach of time. Then a discovery. In what would one day be known as China, near the banks of a river, a team of scientists uncovered something remarkable. Massive bones, curved and stretched longer than any they had seen before. A neck of impossible length. Legs like pillars. A creature lost to history, now found again. They gave her kind a name from the place where she slept, Mammonchosaurus. To them, she was a marvel of evolution, a symbol of scale and mystery. But the earth remembered more. Not just her bones, but her choice. Her strength was not in power or speed, but in standing when all else fell. In facing fire not with rage, but with stillness. In giving when there was nothing left to give. Though her voice had never spoken and her name was not her own, her story had traveled through stone and time. And now it belonged to the world again. Not just as a fossil, but as a legacy. In a quiet museum hall far from the ancient forests of the Jurassic world, children stood beneath the towering replica of Mammonchosaurus. Her neck stretched across the ceiling, her tail arched behind, frozen in a graceful pose that once shaped the earth. Light shone upward, casting long shadows that moved slowly across polished floors. They looked up in wonder. Some asked questions. Others stood in silence, imagining her walking through trees that no longer existed. One child placed her hand gently on the railing and whispered to no one in particular, "She looks like she was protecting something." Outside the museum, the world turned. Skies filled with a distant rumble of engines. Forests rose and fell again. Rivers were dammed, redirected, reborn. Fires came, and so did floods. Humanity shaped the planet as it saw fit, often forgetting that it was not the first to walk paths of survival and sacrifice. But deep beneath the ground, where silence still held stories, Mara rested, not forgotten, not lost, just waiting. Because some legacies are not measured in years, but in the quiet courage to stand, even when the world falls apart. And sometimes, across a vast stretch of time, that courage is remembered, not in words, but in wonder. And wonder, like life, always finds a way back.